My niece Hannah is the best. She looks just like my sister when she was young. I will divorce you, an older and unattractive woman, and remarry Hannah. We've been together for 21 years now. My young and beautiful body feels so much better and is prettier than your aged body. I've been hiding it so I wouldn't hurt you, but sorry it's come out. Across a four-seater table. The husband and niece sit next to each other. Shoulder to shoulder, looking at us with moist eyes. It's clear at a glance that their arms on the side they are touching are unnaturally intertwined. I don't understand. Hannah isn't your blood-related niece. And a divorce, really? Blood relation doesn't matter. I truly love Hannah. The resolve in the husband's eyes was sincere. The eyes of someone truly in love. I had never seen this side of my husband in our over 20 years of living together. Hey, I have something to say too. My sister-in-law, who was sitting next to me, began speaking to my husband and niece in a cold voice. Contrary to me, who was so shaken I could lose myself, she was strong and composed. Look at this. She slowly took something out on the table. The faces of my husband and Hannah changed as they saw it. What followed was a tragic event, the likes of which I hope to never experience again. My name is Kelly. I'm a housewife. I married my husband 37 years ago. After our marriage, both of us loved children and tried to have them early on. But it was not easy, and we ended up knocking on the doors of a fertility clinic. No cause of infertility was found on my side, but it turned out that my husband was azoospermic. At that time, infertility was often thought to be a problem on the woman's side. So it was a blessing that my husband came to the consultation with me. And neither of us thought the cause could be on his side. When we learned of my husband's azoospermia, his face lost confidence. Which I still vividly remember. There was no treatment, we were told to give up, and although I loved children, I decided to switch my feelings and not mind having a fun life with just the two of us. However, contrary to my feelings, my husband's attitude towards me began to clearly change from that time. He started to attack me with sarcasm whenever he could. At first, I was shocked by the shocking event of finding out that I was the cause of the infertility. So it was understandable to be self-deprecating. I thought he would return to his usual kind self after a while, and I tolerated it with leniency. But his aggressive and cold attitude continued thereafter. At the same time, I heard that my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, had gotten divorced. Both of my husband's parents had already passed away. So she had to raise her 2-year-old daughter, Hannah, on her own. Feeling pity for my sister-in-law's situation, my husband and I started to help with her childcare from that time. Being someone who originally loved children, I doted on my little niece very much. I remember buying her a stuffed animal of her favorite rabbit character. And playing make-believe with her, treating her like my own daughter. My husband also doted on her very much. Since before my sister-in-law's divorce, our families had been close and frequently interacted. So it didn't take long for my niece to become attached to us as a couple. Thinking back, my husband might have been smitten with my niece from around that time. Even living under the same roof, he wouldn't meet my eyes, and whenever he spoke, it was only about my niece and sister-in-law. Losing interest in me, I felt my heart being gouged by his attitude. But when I brought up my niece and sister-in-law, he would talk happily. And I ultimately forgave him. I convinced myself that this was the way to get along with my husband. And that it was fine, and I continued my daily life. Now my niece has grown up and is living independently. My husband is still cold to me. He returns home to eat every day, but on holidays, I have no idea where he is or what he's doing. Despite this terrible marital relationship, we are still a couple that has been together for many years. I was reluctant to stir things up by getting a divorce, so I tolerated my selfish husband's actions. In retrospect, maybe that kindness was not good. One Saturday morning, my husband was out early, just after sunrise, as usual. I got up at the usual time and was cleaning the house alone. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. I ran to the intercom screen, and there was my sister-in-law. It was rare for her to visit suddenly, and I wondered what was up. But I soon noticed that her face on the screen was tense and her breathing was rough. I realized that something serious had happened. I invited my sister-in-law into the house. Kelly. Sorry for the sudden visit. I actually have an urgent matter to discuss. Please look at this first. Saying that, she hurriedly took out her smartphone from her bag. Sweat was evident on her forehead. She then showed me a video saved on her smartphone. This video, could it be? I can't believe it. The video showed by my sister-in-law featured my husband and niece walking arm in arm into a hotel. Although I couldn't hear their conversation, their affectionate manner, unlike that of a normal uncle and niece, was evident. I felt the blood drain from my head. I happened to see them in town earlier, so I called out to them. But it seems they didn't notice me. When I looked closer, they were walking arm in arm, which felt odd. So, I followed them for a while, and they went into a hotel together. But it might not be for that reason, right? After all, they're blood-related uncle and niece. I can't believe it, there must have been some reason. Faced with a shocking reality, I couldn't believe it at once. Aware or unaware of how I felt, my sister-in-law made a shocking confession. Kelly, actually, I've been suspecting those two for a while. I didn't want to believe it, so I kept thinking it must be something else. But seeing them walk together with my own eyes turned my suspicions into certainty. They are definitely guilty. The serious look in my sister-in-law's eyes stirred my anxiety. My husband and my niece are having an affair. Blood relatives, no less. Just the thought made me nauseous. It seemed my sister-in-law felt the same. The air in the familiar home stagnated, and time passed miserably. I decided to confront my husband and niece about the truth after discussing it with my sister-in-law. However, the video my sister-in-law took of them entering the hotel alone wasn't strong enough evidence of their affair. Even if I choose to divorce, I will need solid evidence that leaves no room for them to deny their actions. My sister-in-law and I decided to hire a detective agency to investigate the affair. After discussing it, we agreed to split the cost of hiring the detective agency. And thus, the curtain rose on our quest for revenge. Later, on a Sunday at 7 p.m., filled with dinner and ready for the confrontation, my sister-in-law and I summoned my niece and husband to the living room, telling them we needed to talk and bringing the photographic evidence from the detective agency. My husband and niece, who had apparently been out on a date, arrived together. This was the most sacred part of the home we had lived in for over 20 years, where we welcomed guests. The LED lights cast a stark white glow, as if to expose the sins hidden by the night's darkness. Under that light, all actors took their seats at the four-seater table. My husband looked annoyed. "It's a request from my sister, so it can't be helped, but what do you want, Kelly?" he grumbled. Niece looked at me with a questioning eye. Both of them wore expressions that dismissed me. While enduring their unpleasant glares, I started the conversation. You're having an affair with Hannah, aren't you?" The moment he heard those words, my husband's eyes widened, like a small animal sensing danger from a loud noise. He couldn't hide his surprise. Meanwhile, the niece beside him showed no signs of disturbance. Her eyes, bored as if the fun game had just ended and she had been caught, looked at me disinterestedly. "Auntie, an affair?" I don't know what you're talking about. It seemed my niece intended to deny everything. I have evidence, look at this. Despite my niece's unexpectedly composed demeanor, I was internally shaken. However, I made sure to appear as composed as possible while laying out photos of my husband and niece caught in the act on the table. There were more than 20 photos. Not just of them entering the hotel, but also at the reception and leaving the hotel. And all on different days. Now they couldn't deny it. Time to panic. I was confident of my victory. For a moment, there was silence as if time had stopped. The white light above flickered for an instant. Then my husband slowly began to speak. Humph. Yes, I am having an affair with Hannah. No, it's not an affair, it's serious. I truly love Hannah. She looks just like my sister when she was young, absolutely beautiful, like a goddess. While we're at it, let me make it clear. Kelly, I will divorce you, an old and unattractive woman, and I plan to remarry Hannah. It was a shocking confession. My sister-in-law sitting next to me made a small noise of anger. Auntie, we've been in love since I was in high school. Uncle seemed to dislike you even back then. I am young and beautiful, very pretty. But Kelly is not good, her face is like a pug's, full of wrinkles and spots. You've been nothing but a source of stress for us for a long time. My niece spoke ill of me with a voice full of enjoyment. Hearing her scornful voice made the fact that I had been betrayed by my niece, whom I raised like a daughter, feel all the more real. I cursed my own foolishness for never doubting their relationship. The silly convention that blood relatives cannot love each other is something we've transcended. We have been loving each other for a long time. No, perhaps the depth of our love and passion is because of our close blood relation. Kelly, you, an outsider, wouldn't understand. Let me confess, I have always thought my sister was beautiful and loved her as a woman. Seeing Hannah grow up to look just like her beautiful sister made me believe it was fate that she came back to me after her divorce. My husband spoke of his love for my sister-in-law and niece with an ecstatic expression. His nose turned red as he became intoxicated with himself. My niece leaned heavily against him, looking at his face with sleepy eyes. Their cheeks were flushed, as if they were alone in their own world. I felt a mix of disappointment and contempt. My sister-in-law next to me finally spoke up. Sean, thanks for sharing your philosophy on incest. But look at this, can you still keep up your pointless chatter? With that, she calmly placed a photo on the table. You're having affairs with other women besides Hannah. After all your grand statements, it seems any young woman will do. The photo showed my husband entering a hotel with a woman who was not my niece. Their demeanor, which had been lost in forbidden love, changed abruptly upon seeing the photo. My husband froze, staring at the photo, unable to move. His face turned pale. In contrast, my niece trembled with anger, her face red, her lips quivering violently. Suddenly, she began to scream. Sean. What is this? With those words, my niece lunged at my husband. Oof, he exclaimed foolishly as she pulled him, causing him to fall from the chair. As my husband collapsed on the floor, my niece mounted him and began pummeling his face with her fists, hysterically. Her bizarre screams and his foolish cries echoed through the room. Before I could even shiver from hearing her address him by name, I thought, this is bad, I need to stop this before someone gets killed. But my sister-in-law was quicker, she moved behind my niece and grabbed her arms. Then pushed her onto the couch in the living room. Hannah, calm down. Doing this won't solve anything. On the couch, my sister-in-law scolded my niece, who sobbed with tear-filled eyes. But Sean cheated. Affair? What are you talking about? You had an affair too, with your own blood relative. That's truly disgusting. I never want to see either of your faces again. After saying this, she calmly let go of her niece's arm. What? Mom, aren't you on my side? The shocked niece, her face contorted, reached out to her mother with trembling hands. However, her mother, filled with anger, sharply shook off her hand. Then, she faced her daughter and husband and spoke with a resolute expression. It's disgusting to think that my own daughter I cherished would have a relationship with her brother. And even more revolting is that my own brother looked at me with sexual interest. Because of you two, I will be plagued with nausea for the rest of my life. As of today, I am severing ties with both of you. This was her declaration of disownment. The niece, who had been crying like a child on the sofa, expressed her shock through sobs. Then, hearing those words, the suddenly stunned husband collapsed weakly and cried out. Hey, sister. A severance? I want to get along with you until I die. Please stop the severance. Look, why don't the three of us, Hannah, you, and you'll live in this house together from now on? See, this is how it is. Saying this, he staggered and knelt in front of his sister. The husband apologized for the cancellation of the severance. Both the niece and I couldn't hide our surprise. However, his sister remained motionless, looking down at her brother with a frozen, cold gaze. A moment of silence passed. I regained my composure and sorted out my thoughts. It seems that in my husband's mind, I was supposed to leave this house. Even in such a chaotic situation, he treated me dismissively. On top of feeling disgusted. He didn't think about me at all and couldn't control his desires like a monkey. Watching my husband apologizing, the anger I had been suppressing surged and began to boil within me. After the anger had boiled over, it felt as if the frothy bubbles had burst with a pop. And something I had been holding back inside burst forth vigorously. Facing my husband, I spoke in a cold tone. I will divorce you as you wish. I don't want to see your or your niece's face ever again. I declared my intention to divorce my husband. But before I could finish delivering the sentence that would sever him, he foolishly came closer, begging shockingly. All right, Kelly. I'll divorce you as you wish. But in return, make her take back her declaration of severance. My husband clung to me desperately. I was thoroughly disgusted. Even now, he was still trying to treat me like a servant. No, he's hopeless. I hurriedly pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared just in case from my bag. I had hoped not to use them, expecting to resolve things amicably. But it seemed I was foolish to expect that. I took out a pen and laid them in front of my husband, who was awkwardly crawling on the floor. He hastily filled in the blanks on the divorce form. All right, I'll sign this. But could you please convince her to change her mind? Kelly, only you can do this task, I'm counting on you. He looked at me with hopeful eyes. Understood. I'll keep my promise. Oh, looks like you're done writing. Well then, you and Hannah take care. Goodbye. After confirming that my husband had finished writing the divorce form, I quickly snatched it from the side and stowed it in my bag. I whispered to my sister-in-law that we should leave, and she agreed. We hurriedly left the house. While preparing to get into the car outside, I could hear my niece yelling at my husband. It's your fault that Mom severed ties with me too. It's all your fault. She screamed this repeatedly. What a hopeless child she turned out to be. I thought as I buckled my seatbelt, listening to her shrill cries. Soon my sister-in-law started the car, and their voices faded into the darkness of the night. Afterward, having nowhere else to go, I stayed at my sister-in-law's apartment. And we began living together as two women. She had decided to sever ties with her husband and niece, and was careful to have no further contact with them. One evening, the apartment's doorbell was frantically rung. When I peeked through the security window on the front door, I saw my niece. Her sobbing voice could be heard through the thin door. I quickly reported to my sister-in-law, who seemed troubled for a while before walking to the front door. She spoke through the door without unlocking it. What happened? Hearing her mother's voice for the first time in a while, my niece cried out happily. Mom. Help. Uncle is stalking me. My sister-in-law and I couldn't hide our surprise at her words. Stalker? How did that happen? As my sister-in-law pressed for answers, my niece began to speak through tears. Mom, after that, I broke up with Uncle. I found out he was cheating on me, and it's his fault you severed ties with me. But it seems he still likes me, because the day after I dumped him, he started showing up at my company. He stares at me every day through the window. It's really creepy. I tried not to make eye contact, but one day I accidentally did. Then he looked at me like a dog that had finally been noticed, and yelled, Hannah, I love you. It was so scary. After finishing her story, my niece began to sob loudly. While I was shocked by my husband's bizarre behavior, I was also worried it might be heard in the other rooms. My sister-in-law let out a deep, heavy sigh and said coldly, I see, you reap what you sow. She coldly dismissed my crying niece. Her reaction was not what my niece had expected, and she suddenly stopped crying. Then she started frantically turning the locked doorknob. Mom. Open up. Hide me in this house. Help. The old iron door creaked and shook. The doorknob was turned violently, as if it would break and the door would burst open at any moment. Hannah. Stop. I've cut ties with you. If you stay here any longer, I'll call the police. When my sister-in-law sharply scolded her, the sound of the doorknob turning stopped abruptly. Then the sobbing resumed and eventually faded away. I heard footsteps descending the stairs, which gradually faded away. After confirming that her niece had left, my sister-in-law returned to the room and slumped onto the floor cushion, then buried her face in the low table with a long sigh. From her posture, it was evident she was extremely fatigued and near her mental limits due to the series of events. I too was startled by my niece's sudden visit, but I could only imagine the headache my sister-in-law must be experiencing, entangled in the nonsensical quarrels between her daughter and brother. I prepared some warm coffee for her and offered it with some sweets. She thanked me with a frail smile. Kelly, I'm truly sorry. It's Hannah again. It's all right, sister. Don't worry about me. You should do what you feel is right. But even though we sent Hannah away, I wonder if that was the right thing to do. If we had coddled her, she would have never learned. As a parent, it's my responsibility to re-educate her. For now, the only way is to push her away. My sister-in-law spoke firmly. Her mouth set in a determined line as she stared intensely at nothing in particular. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder. However, the heart-wrenching decision she made would lead to further tragedy. It was a bright morning when my sister-in-law and I were getting ready to go shopping. Her mobile phone rang. It was her usual ringtone, but for some reason, I felt uneasy. After checking the screen and seeing an unknown number, she frowned but answered the call. I couldn't help but listen to the conversation leaking from the phone, driven by a foreboding feeling. Hello, who is this? A voice responded from the other side. Good morning. This is the police. Am I speaking with Vanessa Johnson? To my shock, the caller was a police officer. My sister-in-law whispered to me that it was the police on the line. Your daughter Hannah and your brother Sean are currently at the station. We need to speak with you, so we regret to inform you that we will be visiting your home shortly. My sister-in-law relayed that the police were coming to our house. My bad feeling had come true. I realized we would be troubled by my husband and niece again and felt a headache coming on. She juggled the phone call with the police and started frantically cleaning the kitchen. I followed suit, starting to tidy up the house to distract myself from my headache. The police arrived. Initially, they intended to speak only with my sister-in-law. But when I mentioned that I was Sean's ex-wife, they asked me to participate in the questioning as well. I apologize for the sudden visit. Unfortunately, your daughter Hannah and her boyfriend were arrested this morning on charges of assault. The robust police officer began to explain the situation. My sister-in-law and I were shocked by the word arrest. The two assaulted your brother Sean, causing injuries including bruises and fractures. Sean reported the incident this morning, and we have been gathering information. Ms. Johnson, Ms. Kelly, do you have any information about this incident? I was speechless. Unbeknownst to me, my niece had acquired a new boyfriend. Together, they had gone to my husband out of obsessive attachment and threatened him with violence. They had injured my husband, who then reported the incident, leading to their arrest. While my sister-in-law was conversing with the police officer, my phone rang. I recognized the number. It was my ex-husband's, which I had deleted from my phone book. Hello, it's been a while. What's up? As I picked up the call, I heard my ex-husband's feeble voice. Although I had learned of his situation from the police, I pretended not to know and asked him. Kelly, listen calmly. I'm in the hospital. I was nearly killed by Hannah and a man she claims is her boyfriend. They inflicted life-threatening injuries on me. It seems like Hannah is being mind-controlled by that hulking brute of a man. She seemed possessed as she directed him to assault me. Kelly, I have a favor to ask. Once my injuries heal, please save Hannah from that delinquent. Before he could finish his rambling, I hung up. It might seem heartless, but I felt no emotion for my weakened ex-husband. He was just a foolish man I had divorced. Whatever happened to him, I no longer cared. After years of treating my niece like a daughter, I had no more concern for her either. My only worry was for my sister-in-law, who had been tormented and disturbed by her family members. Perhaps it was my duty to support her in return. As I was lost in thought, my sister-in-law called my name, asking me to join the conversation with the police officer. I explained the situation surrounding my niece's assault case, incorporating personal details. The police officer listened attentively throughout. After I finished, he expressed his sympathy, saying, "That must have been very tough for you," and offered me a tissue paper. His kind gaze made me unexpectedly tear up. I had tried to remain strong, but I was truly exhausted. The pent-up emotions overflowed, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. My sister-in-law was also moved to tears. The police officer closed his notebook. Please leave the rest to us. It might still be tough for you, Ms. Johnson and Ms. Kelly, but please call me, Jeff, anytime if you need to talk. It doesn't have to be about anything serious, even just a chat is fine. We will do our utmost to ensure brighter days return for you both. With that, Officer Jeff smiled reassuringly. I felt a comforting sense of security from his strong yet gentle demeanor. It felt like everything would be all right, there's no endless suffering. 2 months later, I learned that my ex-husband's injuries would take about 6 months to heal fully. But after a month in the hospital, he was sent home for recovery. Without anyone to help, he was probably living alone in pain. As for my niece, she received a suspended sentence in court, while her accomplice, due to his criminal record, received a prison sentence. It seemed as if she was abandoned the moment her boyfriend was incarcerated. She was also fired from her job. By then, my niece, who was in a deplorable state, had come crying to my sister-in-law's apartment several times. But each time she was coldly turned away. After sending her away, my sister-in-law would invariably mutter painfully that she wanted to forget about Hannah and wanted nothing more to do with her than to change the subject. She would talk at length about her knitting hobby, which she enjoyed. Additionally, I had demanded compensation from Hannah and my ex-husband for their infidelity. Their circumstances, like being hospitalized or on probation, were irrelevant to me. One day, I found that $15,000 had been deposited into my bank account from each of them. The money had been transferred less than a week after I made the claim. While I was surprised that they could muster such an amount, I was impressed that they had fulfilled their obligation. However, normally, my sister-in-law, who avoids speaking of my niece, revealed the truth to me one evening when we were tipsy from drinking. It turned out that my niece, who had lost her job, couldn't possibly afford to pay $15,000. My ex-husband, seeing an opportunity to reconcile with her, had offered to front the compensation in exchange. She had accepted his offer. Thus, the $15,000 paid to me by my niece was actually covered by my ex-husband on her behalf. But as expected, after the payment, my niece had disappeared from my ex-husband's life. My sister-in-law had received frantic calls from him, unable to contact his niece. Further into the conversation, I learned that my ex-husband had borrowed the money for Hannah's share of the compensation from a consumer finance company. He had managed to cover his own part of the compensation with his savings, but he had not had enough to cover the additional amount to win back my niece. That's because he had also been fired. From the day he was dumped by my niece, he had become so obsessed with her that he started skipping work, which, combined with his hospitalization, had led to his dismissal. He is now consuming the money borrowed from consumer finance to live day by day. Truly, he is an irredeemable man. Since then, I've continued to live in the apartment with my sister-in-law, invited by her. The two of us live together without any emotional burdens, and of course, no lovers' quarrels. My sister-in-law once said to me, "Kelly, though we aren't related by blood, you fought alongside me through family troubles, almost like a comrade in arms. Thanks to you, I've been able to stand my ground without crumbling. Let's continue to live together and have fun." That made me feel inexplicably delighted, unable to hide my bashful feelings. My face must have turned red because when my sister-in-law saw it, she laughed joyfully. Better a close neighbor than a distant relative, as the saying goes. I am not related by blood to my sister-in-law. To put it coldly, we are strangers. But this relationship feels comfortable, even though we are just two women, not bound by any special name. Our relationship has endured for over 20 years. Living with her is more enjoyable and fulfilling than my life had been with my husband, whom I had married in a glamorous wedding dress and to whom I had pledged my love. I am happy now.